Hello students, today I am going to introduce Albert Bandura's theory of personality. The main objectives of this module are to describe the characteristic features of social learning theory of Bandura, to explain the concept of reciprocal determinism, to analyze the development of self system, to explain the principle of observational learning, to elucidate the sources of self-efficacy, and to describe Bandura's concept of vicarious learning. Now, let me take you through a brief biographical sketch of Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura was born on December 4th, 1925 in a small town of Mandare in northern Alberta, Canada. He received his bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of British Columbia in 1949. He went on to the University of Iowa, where he received his PhD in 1952. In 1953, he started teaching at Stanford University. Bandura was president of the American Psychological Association in 1973 and received the 𝗵𝗍𝗄 Award for Distinguished Scientific Contributions in 1980. Introduction to Social Learning Theory. Bandura initially named his approach the Social Learning Theory. Later on, it was renamed as Social Cognitive Approach to emphasize the cognitive component involved in it. Social cognitive theory explains behavior in terms of a continuous reciprocal interaction between cognitive, behavioral, and environmental determinants. It emphasizes that people learn by observing others. People's interaction with the environment, behavior of others, and one's own cognition, etc., act as chief factors in influencing the development of personality of an individual. These three factors are not static or independent, rather, they are all reciprocal. Now, let us observe the main tenets of social cognitive theory. People learn by observing others, a process known as vicarious learning. Although learning can modify behavior, people do not always apply what they have learned. Individuals' choice is based on perceived or actual consequences of the learned behavior. People are more likely to follow the behaviors modeled by someone with whom they can identify. The more perceived commonalities and or emotional attachments between the observer and the model, the more likely the observer will learn from the model. Also, the degree of self-efficacy that a learner possesses directly affects his or her ability to learn. Self-efficacy is a fundamental belief in one's ability to achieve a goal. If a person believes that he or she can learn new behaviors, that would make the person much more successful in doing so. So, Bandura's theory of social learning can be explained under the following three headings. 1. Reciprocal determinism. 2. Self system. 3. Principles of observational learning. Now, let us observe reciprocal determinism. Social cognitive theory favors a model of causation involving triadic reciprocal determinism. In this model of reciprocal causation, behavior, cognition, and other personal factors and other environmental influences all operate as interacting determinants that influence each other bidirectionally. Reciprocal causation does not mean that the different sources of influence are of equal strength. Some may be stronger than others, nor do that the reciprocal influences all occur simultaneously. It takes time for a causal factor to exert its influence and activate reciprocal influences. In this diagram, B represents behavior, P represents personal factors in the form of cognitive, affective, and biological events, and E represents the external environment. The PB segment of reciprocal causation reflects the interaction between thought, effect, and action. Expectations, beliefs, self-perceptions, goals, and intentions give shape and direction to behavior. What people think, believe, and feel affects how they behave. The EP segment of reciprocal causation is concerned with the interactive relation between personal characteristics and environmental influences. Human expectations, beliefs, emotional bents and cognitive competencies are developed and modified by social influences. The BE segment of reciprocal causation in the triadic system represents the two-way influence between behavior and the environment. In the transactions of everyday life, behavior alters environmental conditions and is in turn altered by the very conditions it creates. Because of the bidirectionality of influence between behavior and environmental circumstances, people are both products and producers of their environment. They affect the nature of their experience environment through selection and creation of situations. Let us consider how reciprocal determinism applies to your college courses. 1. The environment influencing behavior. There is a course that you very much want to take, but it is not being offered this semester. So, you have to make an alternative selection. A course that you want to take has a prerequisite that does not appeal to you, but you sign up for the latter in order to satisfy the requirement. 2. Behavior influencing the environment. Too few students sign up for a course, so the college cancels it rather than lose money. So, many students sign up for a course that the college decides to offer it more often. Students sign a petition objecting to what they think is an unnecessary prerequisite, and the college eliminates this requirement. 3. Personal factors influencing behavior. You are more likely to sign up for a course that you expect to be interesting or that you believe will be useful in your future profession, or you are less likely to sign up for a course that you do not think you will do well in. 4. Behavior influencing personal factors. You are taking a required course that you do not think you will do well in, so you study harder and get help from a friend. Your efforts seem to be fruitful, so your thoughts become more positive and you expect to do well on the first exam. 5. Personal factors influencing the environment. A course has to be cancelled because students expect it to be boring and believe that it will involve a great deal of work, or extra sections of a course have to be scheduled because students expect it to be very interesting and believe that the workload will be reasonable. 6. The environment influencing personal factors. A course that is boring causes you to think negatively about that subject and believe that you won't like other courses in that area, or being at a top rated college causes you to expect more difficult assignments and believe that you will have to work hard. Thus, a complete analysis of behavior from reciprocal determinism requires consideration of all three sets of behavior: cognitive, behavioral and environmental influence one another. Bandura discusses the personal determinants of behavior in terms of the self system and individual's self efficacy. Now, we shall go through self system. It is evident from the reciprocal determinism that all the three segments are mutually interactive. Now, the question arises that do they have some starting point? Bandura answered in yes, and that point is self system. In social learning theory, a self system is not a psychic agent that controls behavior. Rather, it refers to cognitive structures that provide reference mechanisms to set of functions for perception, evaluation and regulation of behavior. According to Bandura, the three components involved in self system are self observation, judgmental processes and self response. 1. Self observation. In self observation, we look at ourselves, our behavior and keep check on it. 2. Judgment. In judgment, we compare what we see with a standard. For example, we can compare our performance with traditional standards such as rules of etiquette. 3. Self-response. If you did well in comparison with your standard, you give yourself rewarding self-responses. If you did poorly, you give yourself punishing self-responses. These self-responses can range from the obvious, giving yourself a treat to working late, to the more covert, that is feelings of pride or shame. 4. Self-efficacy. A very important concept in psychology that can be understood well with self-regulation is self-efficacy. If over the years you find yourself meeting your standards and life loaded with self-praise and self-reward, you will have a strong sense of self-efficacy. If, on the other hand, you find yourself forever failing to meet your standards and punishing yourself, you will have a poor sense of self-efficacy. Self-efficacy plays an important role in the Banduras theory of self system. According to Bandura, self-efficacy is the belief in one's capabilities to organize and execute the courses of action required to manage prospective situations. In other words, self-efficacy is a person's belief in his or her ability to succeed in a particular situation. Bandura described these beliefs as determinants of how people think, behave and feel. Now, we shall examine the role of self-efficacy. Virtually, all people can identify goals they want to accomplish, things they would like to change and things they would like to achieve. However, most people also realize that putting these plans into action is not quite so simple. Bandura and others have found that an individual's self-efficacy plays a major role in how goals, tasks and challenges are approached. People with a strong sense of self-efficacy have the following characteristics. They view challenging problems as tasks to be mastered. They develop deeper interest in the activities in which they participate. They form a stronger sense of commitment to their interests and activities. They recover quickly from setbacks and disappointments. On the other hand, people with a weak sense of self-efficacy show the following characteristics. They avoid challenging tasks. They believe that difficult tasks and situations are beyond their capabilities. They focus on personal failings and negative outcomes. They quickly lose confidence in personal abilities. Now, let us have a look at the sources of self-efficacy. How does the self-efficacy develop? These beliefs begin to form in early childhood as children deal with a wide variety of experiences, tasks and situations. However, the growth of self-efficacy does not end during youth, but continues to evolve throughout life as people acquire new skills, experiences and understanding. According to Bandura, there are 4 major sources of self-efficacy. 1. Mastery experiences. The most effective way of developing a strong sense of efficacy is through mastery experiences. Performing a task successfully strengthens our sense of self-efficacy. However, failing to adequately deal with a task or challenge can undermine and weaken self-efficacy. 2. Social modeling. Witnessing other people successfully completing a task is another important source of self-efficacy. According to Bandura, when a person sees another person or persons similar to oneself succeeding by one's sustained efforts, makes the person raise the belief that they too possess the capabilities that could help them master comparable activities and succeed. 3. Social persuasion. Bandura also asserted that people could be persuaded to believe that they have the skills and capabilities to succeed. Consider a time when someone said something positive and encouraging that helped you achieve a goal. Getting verbal encouragement from others helps people overcome self-doubt and instead focus on giving their best effort to the task at hand. 4. Psychological responses. Our own responses and emotional reactions to situations also play an important role in self-efficacy. Moods, emotional states, physical reactions, and stress levels can all impact how a person feels about their personal abilities in a particular situation. A person who becomes extremely nervous before speaking in public may develop a weak sense of self-efficacy in these situations. Now, we shall examine the principles of observational learning. Bandura's social cognitive theory emphasizes the social origins of behavior in addition to the cognitive thought processes that influence human behavior and functioning. Bandura's social cognitive approach proposes that cognitive factors are central to human functioning and learning can occur in the absence of direct reinforcement. That is, learning can occur simply through observation of models and in the absence of reinforcement. According to Bandura, people learn a great deal simply by watching or observing others, by reading about what people do, and by making general observations of the world. To illustrate that people learn from watching others, Albert Bandura constructed an experiment entitled Bobo doll behavior, a study of aggression. In this experiment, Bandura exposed a group of children to a video featuring violent and aggressive actions. For the experiment, Bandura made a film of one of his students, a young woman, essentially beating up a Bobo doll. Bobo doll is an inflatable egg-shaped balloon creature with a weight in the bottom that makes it bob back up when you knock him down. The woman punched the clown, shouting "Socceroo." She kicked it, sat on it, hit with a little hammer, and so on, shouting various aggressive phrases. Bandura showed this film to groups of kindergartens who liked it a lot. They then were let out to play. In the playroom were several observers with pens and clipboards in hand, a brand new Bobo doll, and a few little hammers. A lot of little kids bet the daylights out of the Bobo doll. They punched it and shouted "Socceroo," kicked it, sat on it, hit it with the little hammers, and so on. In other words, they imitated the young lady in the film, and quite precisely. Bandura called this phenomenon as observational learning or modeling, and this theory is usually called social learning theory. Bandura established that there were certain steps involved in the modeling process. 1. Attentional processes. In order to learn, you need to be paying attention. Anything that detracts your attention, that is, if you are sleepy, groggy, sick, nervous, or hyper, you will learn less well, which has a negative effect on observational learning. On the other hand, if the model is interesting or there is novel aspect to the situation, you are far more likely to dedicate your full attention to learning. Some of the things that influence attention involve characteristics of the model. If the model is colorful and dramatic, for example, we pay more attention. If the model is attractive or prestigious or appears to be particularly competent, we will pay more attention. And if the model seems more like ourselves, we pay more attention. 2. Retentional processes. The ability to store information is also an important part of the learning process. Retention can be affected by a number of factors, but the ability to pull up information later and act on it is vital to observational learning. Thus, you must be able to retain and remember what you have paid attention to. This is where imagery and language come in. We store what we have seen the model doing in the form of mental images or verbal descriptions. When so stored, we can later bring up the image or description so that we can reproduce it with our own behavior. 3. Reproduction processes. Once you have paid attention to the model and retained the information, it is time to actually perform the behavior you observed. Further, practice of the learned behavior leads to improvement and skill advancement. Through the reproduction processes, you have to translate the images or descriptions into actual behavior. Also, it has been noted that our abilities improve even when we just imagine ourselves performing. Many athletes, for example, imagine their performance in their mind's eye prior to actually performing. 4. Motivational processes. In order for observational learning to occur and be successful, you have to be motivated to imitate the behavior that has been modeled. Reinforcement and punishment play an important role in motivation. For example, if you see another student rewarded with extra credit for coming to class on time, you might start to show up a few minutes early each day. Now, let us know the concept of vicarious learning. Closely related to observational learning is vicarious learning, another distinctive feature of Bandura's social cognitive theory. Vicarious learning, or the process of learning from other people's behavior, is a central idea of social cognitive theory. This idea asserts that individuals can witness observed behaviors of others and then reproduce the same actions. As a result of this, individuals refrain from making mistakes and can perform behaviors better if they see individuals complete them successfully. Example: a student answers the teacher's question because he saw one student praised by the teacher for doing it. So, to sum up then, in today's lesson, we have understood about the concept of reciprocal determinism, the self system, concept of self-efficacy, role of self-efficacy, sources of self-efficacy, principles of observational learning or modeling, steps involved in the modeling process, the Bobo doll experiment, and the concept of vicarious learning in great detail.